Okay, we're set.
Good.
Where's Elliot?
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Elliot Gerson from the Aspen Institute, and it's my great pleasure to give you, I guess, a pre-welcome to this preview of the Ideas Festival. I first need to explain why there are only 2 chairs in front of you instead of 3. Professor Lawrence Lessig was just about to land in this beautiful valley, and many of you have had this experience before, and he was diverted back to Denver. So very unfortunate for him, but as I was just saying to Justice O'Connor, and with no disrespect at all to the remarkable Professor Lessig, this just means that all of you will have even more time with Justice O'Connor. The topic today is an enormously important one. Politics, money, judicial elections, and related subjects. You have an extraordinary now interviewer who was to be your moderator in Jeffrey Rosen, probably familiar to many, if not most of you, in addition to his day job as a very distinguished professor of law at the George Washington University Law School. He's the legal affairs editor of the New Republic magazine. He's a fellow of the Brookings. And he has written many books for his extraordinarily young age, and he's also written extensively in other publications as well on judicial legal topics and about the Supreme Court in particular. And of course, Justice Sandra Day O'Connor needs no introduction anywhere, I think particularly in this valley where she has consistently been one of the most beloved speakers among our participants. Obviously, in addition to her career, and Jeff Rosen may talk a little bit about that in his conversation with you, and her remarkable career as a justice, one thing that we are all very, very fortunate about in this country is that as a retired justice, she has continued to serve the country in an absolutely remarkable way. Most justices, when they retire from the court, if they retire from the court at all, because many people think life tenure means you stay on the court until you die, those who do retire rarely take the position that Justice O'Connor has, which is to use her formidable energies and intellect to go around the country and talk about critical legal issues, explain how our judicial system works, indeed how our government works, provide an answer to the terrible problem we have with the loss of civic education in our schools. Most of our children don't really understand how our government works. Sandra Day O'Connor goes out and speaks with young people, people of all ages, about these critical topics. And she's also not afraid of controversy. I predict that when we open to questions, there'll probably be some questions that, both because of her judicial temperament and for political reasons that are important, she might not be able to answer. But she has, unlike any of her brethren, really jumped into public discussions and issues of great public import, especially this issue of judicial elections, and especially judicial elections where the power and influence of money has such a great effect. So she has not just quietly retired to her beloved Arizona, where she told me it was a cool 110 degrees when she left yesterday. She is traveling the country and continuing to serve the country just as well and in just as distinguished a fashion as she did for so many years on the Supreme Court. So it's now my pleasure to turn things over to Jeff Rosen. There will be an opportunity for questions, and just one logistical comment. The opening of the festival will be back in this room at 5 o'clock. We do need to make some adjustments and changes in the room. So this will end at roughly at 4:30. So you will need to leave, enjoy Anderson Park, go back to any of our other facilities, but do plan to come back here for the opening at 5 o'clock. Thank you.
Now, just one correction. I mean, he had his chance for an introduction. He talked about life tenure of justices.
I think I better stay up.
Yeah, I think he has to stay here. Now, I tried to get him to pull up a chair and join us anyway. Maybe he will. But justices are just another division of federal judges, and they are appointed. not for life, but for good behavior. Remember that.
I'll remember that.
Remember that. Okay.
Thank you.
Very good. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as you can see from this pre-interview, we are in for a treat.
No.
Ordinarily, it would be a harrowing event for a moderator to lose half of his panel, but in this case, I cannot imagine a more exciting opportunity for a legal writer and a citizen than to have the chance to sit down one-on-one with this remarkable woman and to ask her questions, not only about money and politics, because we're going to have to fill the rest of the half hour, but also about whatever else comes to our minds. So this will be like a free-ranging dinner party conversation, and I'm going to ask whatever comes into my mind, and you'll answer what you can, but we'll just have a good time.
But it is too bad that Larry Lessig got turned away from the airport. It would have been nice. I was counting on him to answer all the tough questions, and now he's bailed out. So we're going to have to make do some way.
We'll have a great time doing it.
Right.
Ladies and gentlemen, you know Justice O'Connor well from the Aspen Institute. I just want to say that there isn't a day that goes by that I do not miss her presence more and more on the U.S. Supreme Court. When you see in area after area, from campaign finance reform to affirmative action to religion cases, her wise pragmatism and quiet leadership is very, very badly missed, and that's why it's all the more exciting to have the chance to ask her about some of these important issues today. Justice, let's begin by asking about the topic that we're supposed to ask about, and that's judicial elections. How did you get interested in the problem of the corrupting influence of money in judicial elections, and what is the problem in particular?
I've been a personal participant in how one becomes a judge because Arizona's my home state. And when I was still living in Arizona, when I first went there, I couldn't get a job in a law firm because law firms wouldn't hire women lawyers. That was back in 1957. Couldn't be done. So I had to figure out some way to practice law and to do some of the things that I wanted to do in the legal profession. I ended up doing various things in Arizona. But one of them, at one point, was to try to serve as a judge, a trial court judge in Arizona. And at that time, Arizona had election of judges. And I had to run for election as a trial judge in Arizona. And I had an opponent in the primary election, another Republican judge who was a very good man, actually. I didn't enjoy running against him. He was fine. But then I had an opponent in the general election, and I didn't mind running against him. I thought that was okay. But in the election, it was just what you'd expect. We had to run ads. And in order to run ads, we had to collect a little money so you could pay for the ads. And so I designated somebody to be my finance chairman and put a committee together to see what we could do to raise a little money. And you know the people who were willing to contribute a little something were the very lawyers who thought it was most likely they would appear in my court. That's who gave the money. And so there you are. That's just, we weren't collecting big sums. It probably didn't matter if some lawyer provided $50 to my little campaign. But it's much more expensive than that in big races for judicial office in states today. In fact, look at the West Virginia case where there was a judge. West Virginia elects its judges. West Virginia has a lot of mining operations. They produce coal and other things in West Virginia. And one of the biggest mining companies in West Virginia had a $50 million judgment against them for something. Somebody sued them and got a judgment for $50 million. West Virginia just has a two-tier court system, the trial court and the state Supreme Court. And they wanted to appeal to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court there has 5 members. And there was an election upcoming for a seat on that court. And one of the judges was an incumbent, and he had an opponent for the election. Well, the mining company that had the judgment against it provided almost $50 million to the judge who was a candidate to keep his seat. Now, how do you like that? That's a little more than $50, isn't it? So one wonders when that happens whether it can be a fair proceeding. Well, the man who got all the money, surprise, surprise, he won the election. And then the appeal was heard by the state Supreme Court, and in a divided opinion, 3-2, with the judge who got the money casting the deciding vote, the mining company won. Well, I mean, this is a concern for all of us. That's not the way things should work out in court, because the courtroom in our country is supposed to be the one safe place where you can have a fair, independent decision made by someone who's qualified to make it. I mean, this is vital in our system of government. We believe in 3 branches. The 3rd branch is the judicial branch. When the framers of the Constitution wrote it, they didn't provide for electing federal judges, did they? Appointed by the president with the advice and consent of the Senate. That's how every one of the original states started, with appointment. But by the early 1800s, they began to change. And they were encouraged by one of our then presidents to maybe consider election. And starting in Georgia, and then a great many states decided to switch to the election of state judges. And to this day, 22 out of our 50 states have judicial elections. Now, that case I told you about from West Virginia, the other side that lost the case filed a petition in the federal courts and said, I was denied due process with this business of the large campaign contribution. That was not, I did not have due process in the West Virginia Supreme Court. And the petition ended up eventually in the US Supreme Court, and they finally got 4 votes to take it. I don't remember how many weeks it sat around, several. And at the Supreme Court, there are 9 justices, and to accept a petition from somebody to hear the case, it takes the agreement of at least 4 of the 9 to hear the case. And I'm not sure why it took so long to get 4 votes to take it, but it did. And the Supreme Court took it, and at the end of the day, a majority, it was a 5-4 decision, held that the appellant was denied due process of law with having the judge having received so much money from one of the litigants. And I thought that was an appropriate decision. I mean, I don't like to comment on decisions by the court, but from my perspective, that was certainly a position the court could take, and I think it was probably wise to do it. When I lived in Arizona with our system of election of judges, I ended up in time serving in the state Senate as a state senator. And I ended up serving as Senate Majority Leader. And in that position, I sponsored legislation in Arizona to amend our Constitution to eliminate the election of judges in Arizona and go to a merit selection scheme. And that went to a vote in Arizona with the voters, and by a very narrow margin, it passed. And I have lived long enough to see that system operate and evolve in Arizona, and it's been superb. It's just remarkable to be close at hand and see the changes. And it has produced some very intelligent, qualified judges and no problem of campaign contributions coming into the courtroom. It's just really worked well. And they've opened up the process of selection in Arizona. There is a commission of citizens, most of them appointed by the governor, who sit and consider the applications of people who want to be judges and decide which ones to recommend for appointment. And they end up recommending no more than about 8 or 9 people for an appointment seat. And the law in Arizona opens to the public all of the hearings of that commission. So any citizen can be there and watch the people who've applied come in and answer questions. They can hear all of it. They can read all of the applications and all of the information about the candidates. And it's worked really well. And the other thing that Arizona does is collect information from everybody who appears in that judge's courtroom. Jurors, witnesses, litigants. Everybody can make comments to the State Bar of Arizona about the judge and say what they like or don't like about the judge. And all those comments are open and available to the public. And so when it comes time to have a retention election of a judge that's been appointed after 6 years or whatever it is, their name goes on the ballot and the voters vote, you want to keep this judge, yes or no? And they can have all this information about the judge and any complaints that have been made about the judge, whether he's up to date on the caseload, how often he's been reversed on appeal, or she, as the case may be. And it's worked out extremely well. Well, I've talked too much about it, but that's why I've been involved in encouraging states that still elect their judges to stop doing it. I haven't won any of those battles yet, but maybe it will in time. Maybe people will wake up.
I think they are waking up. And just to confirm that the Aspen Ideas Festival is always ripped from the headlines, just this morning, the US Supreme Court struck down by a 5-4 vote a path-breaking campaign finance bill from Arizona itself. Now, Justice, I know you haven't read the decision.
No, I haven't. What did
but
they do?
Here, this was a law that arose out of a corruption scandal.
Yeah.
So people were afraid that legislators were being bought, and you were a former Arizona legislator. You know what that's like. So first the voters imposed campaign contribution limits. That didn't solve the problem. The next year there was the worst public corruption scandal in history, known as scam. 10% of the legislatures were caught accepting campaign bribes in exchange for supporting a piece of legislation. So in response to this, the voters passed a referendum guaranteeing public funding for elections. And you've said that if you can't have merit selection, public funding is the next best alternative.
Well, it's one way to go.
It's one way to go.
Yeah.
But the Supreme Court, by a 5-4 vote, struck that down. The claim was that providing merit increases, sort of markups, in other words, you get more public money based on how much your opponent spends. If the opponent chooses not to accept the public money, that violates the First Amendment because it inhibits the speech of the person who doesn't take public money. And there was really a remarkable dissent by Justice Elena Kagan, who she had a great line where she talked about, I think this is the first time that this word has been used in a US Supreme Court decision. Here it is. She says, the opponents are making a novel argument that Arizona violated the First Amendment rights by dispersing funds to other speakers, even though they could have received but chose to spurn the same financial assistance. Some people might call that chutzpah. I was very glad to see that in the US reports, especially from the woman who said that, like most
Well, now
Jews.
tell us more about that decision. What did the court base it on?
It based it on the Davis decision from a few years ago, where you were not on the court, where the court struck down the so-called Millionaires Amendment that tried to give public funding at the federal level to people who chose not to accept public funds. And the reasoning of that case was that if your opponent is going to get more money based on the amount that you spend, that would inhibit his or her political speech. And the dissenters, led by Justice Kagan, said, this is not an attempt to equalize funds at all. It doesn't inhibit any speech at all. It promotes speech, and the framers would have insisted on something like this. And she ended with a very resonant conclusion where she said,
Well, let's hear it.
okay, here we go.
And then tell us what the division on the court was
I will, I'll do
in
that.
numbers.
So she ends up by saying, less corruption, more speech, robust campaigns leading to the election of representatives not beholden to the few, but accountable to the many. The people of Arizona might have expressed a decent respect for these objectives. Today they don't get it. So she was quite exercised. And the division was 5-4. Chief Justice Roberts wrote the majority opinion. He was joined by Justice Scalia, Justice Alito, Justice Thomas, and Justice Kennedy. And Justice Kagan was joined by Breyer, Ginsburg, and Sotomayor. So broadly, again, you haven't read it and you don't want to comment too specifically, but do you think that public financing violates the Constitution?
Well, I hadn't thought so. Many states have given some of that. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, West Virginia has recently adopted some form of public assistance to candidates as one of the remedies. They didn't want to change their system, but I think they did. So this is going to come as a shock to some states who've adopted some aspect of public funding for judicial campaigns.
And I gather the dissenters feared that this might call into question public funding at the federal level too, because the problem is if you just provide a lump sum, President Obama could have gotten $105 million if he'd forsworn public funds. Raising private funds, he could get $745 million, so it wasn't feasible for him to do it. That's why Arizona and other states think you have to have a step up where you get more funds based on how much your opponent spends, and without that, might it be possible that the whole public financing system is called into question?
Well, I don't know, we'll find out. But I'm sorry that I didn't have the opinion in time to read it today, to be prepared.
This comes against a backdrop, as you know, about a debate about the proper role of money in politics, and that means that I have to ask about the next decision, which is underlying all this, which is the Citizens United case. In that case, the court seemed to say that stopping the appearance of corruption is not a legitimate constitutional goal. Only quid pro quo corruption can be restricted. And if that's true, then most campaign finance laws would be called into question. I gather you don't agree with that statement.
Well, I think that's a concern, very much a concern as we look at these things. The decision you're referring to, Citizens United, was a concern to me because what it did was to recognize corporations as being fully protected by the First Amendment as much as an individual is. And I thought that was a potential problem long term. I very much doubt that the framers of the Constitution, when they wrote the First Amendment, how did they word it? Now here, where's my purse? I keep it with me.
Oh, that's good.
We'll look at it.
I should have brought mine too.
But I don't think they had corporations in mind, to tell you the truth. Let's see what you think when I read it to you. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of people peaceably to assemble and petition for grievances. Now, I mean, do you think they were thinking about corporations there or about us as individuals? I sort of thought all along the framers of the Constitution were talking about the right of people, individuals, people, not corporate entities. So I've been pretty concerned about this whole approach.
You, first of all, I love to see you just quoting the text of the Constitution. Justice Black used to pull it out and say, no law means no law. But you read it, and as common sense suggests, corporations are not in there.
Yeah, I would have thought so.
Now, you wrote an opinion in the 2003 McConnell case.
I did write an opinion.
You wrote, you wrote many superb opinions, but this
Okay.
one came to the opposite conclusion
Okay.
to the Citizens United case. And you upheld the crucial parts of the McCain finance law. And you
I
said,
did.
many years ago, we observed that to say Congress is without power to pass appropriate legislation to safeguard an election from the improper use of money to influence the result is to deny the nation in a vital particular the power of self-protection. Money, like water, will always find an outlet. Would you have voted the opposite way in Citizens United?
No, I thought I was right in Citizens United.
In McConnell, you were right. But
Yes, in McConnell. So coming in Citizens United, the court, in effect, overruled that.
Correct. So you would have been on the other side.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll let my words speak for themselves in the earlier case. That was my view. But I don't think it's the view of the current court, sadly.
And the idea that corporations have the same free speech rights as persons could have much
Yeah.
broader implications.
Yes, it could. So we'll see.
And you have a pragmatic understanding of this. You were the only member, you were the last member of the Supreme Court to have been a practical serving politician. As a
so.
former legislator, what is the cost of striking down these very complicated, nuanced, practical regulations in the name of these abstractions about corporate speech?
Well, I guess we'll have to see over time, but I think it's a concern. These things were enacted to try to preserve some semblance of having decent, effective representation in our legislative bodies and making sure that it's possible for people to run even though they're not well-funded but have an opponent who is extremely well-funded. That was the thinking. I don't know how well they've worked, but it looks like we're not going to have that anymore.
And you're also very concerned about public confidence in the judiciary and in the political
Very
system.
much so. I just think the framers put together a pretty decent form of government. It was rather new at the time, but they established the three branches of government that we know: the executive, the president, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. And when it came to the judges, as I said before, they didn't provide for the election of federal judges, they provided for their appointment. And that's how every one of the states started out. But over time, they've moved to this election of state judges. And I don't think it has served the nation well. I really don't. But I've spoken to a number of states that were considering a change. One of the recent ones was Nevada, a neighbor of California and Arizona. And Nevada had a proposition on the ballot to stop, to go to a system of appointing their judges instead of popular elections. And unfortunately, it was defeated in the election, and I was disappointed. But that was the voters' choice. And my observation is that voters are reluctant to give up anything that they think is my right to vote. I don't want to give that up. So if the state has allowed the voters to vote for judges, the voters are not very eager to give up that right.
Well, this is very frustrating because if, as you say, the voters don't want to give up the right, and the only alternative is public financing, and the Supreme Court strikes down public financing.
Stricken that, so we're kind of left with systems that need help.
What do we do?
Well, I hope states will re-examine it and maybe eliminate the election of judges. That's what I'd like to see happen. I don't think we ought to be electing them at all.
When you were deciding these great cases like McConnell, did you think about the practical impact of these decisions and about public confidence and all these important questions we're talking about?
Well, yes, I tend to kind of think that way. That's probably because of my experience at the state level and thinking problems through, as I used to have to do as a legislator. Yes, I'm inclined to do that.
And do you think that judges who haven't had that political experience, who've been law professors, for example, as more than half of this court is, I'm sorry to report, are they less likely to think in those
I
sensible,
don't know.
pragmatic
They
terms?
can think things through pretty ably.
Yeah.
So my hope is that we will have judges and justices who do think through these issues and see them, because they're perfectly capable of understanding the problems and the issues.
The last time the court struck down lots of laws in the name of the rights of corporations, it got into some trouble. This was in the 1930s when the New Deal was struck down and FDR threatened to pack the court and it backed away. If this court strikes down campaign finance laws in the name of the rights of corporations, possibly health care, could we see a return to the 1930s with the president fighting back and saying this is an activist court defending the corporations rather than the people?
Oh, I haven't seen signs of that yet. I don't see that we need to make that speculation. But I would like to see more states re-examine their method of selecting judges, and those that elect them think again about it.
And there's some cases on the other side. In this AT&T case this year, the court said that the Fifth Amendment rights of corporations are not the same as that of individuals. So maybe they won't ride this particular horse all the way to the stables. We'll see.
That would be an encouraging thing. I hope maybe that's the case.
Yeah. Partisan gerrymandering is another problem with the electoral system that's along these lines. And we've seen the fact that representatives can basically choose their constituents has led to an awful lot of polarization, because you only have to win the primary and you no longer have to move to the center. You just play right or play left. Are you concerned about this problem and the public confidence that it inspires?
Well, I think every state is confronted after a 10-year census with the problem of redrawing the boundaries of every legislative district, every congressional district. They have to redraw all the boundaries to try to make the populations equal. If you have a state with 5 congressional districts, then the state has to see, after the census is taken, that the population in those 5 districts is basically equal. And they have to do the same thing in their own state legislatures. And that process is going on right now in all the states, because we've completed the census and we know how many people there are. I know it's going on in Arizona and it's going on here in this state and so on. And how the states draw those lines can make a difference in the outcome of elections. But one of the things that have been recognized as legitimate concerns in drawing the boundaries of, for instance, a legislative district is the city boundaries or communities that don't want to be split up. And one of the things that courts have upheld is drawing lines that protect the integrity of the boundaries of a town or a city or some other community. And so you're going to end up with some hard decisions when you draw these election districts. I don't know how to answer it. They're challenged sometimes in the states where new districts are drawn, and sometimes if they look too strange, they're challenged. You've seen districts drawn, and we all have. Wasn't there one in Texas where the boundary of the district, they had a little narrow thing, and then they had a tail that was several hundred miles long?
That's right. They said if you drove down the district with both car doors open, you'd kill the 2 people in the district.
Right, right. I mean, it was the strangest district boundary I've ever seen. So sometimes the people charged with drawing the districts are doing some very weird things.
And to counteract these weird shapes, I guess the best proposal is merit district drawing. They proposed that in California, where a bipartisan commission would draw the district lines rather than having politicians do it. But that went down to defeat, maybe for the same reason that the judicial election
was that defeated in California?
It was, unfortunately, for similar reasons. It's frustrating because you almost feel that these good government reforms are being rejected by the voters, and then the court struck down the rest.
In Arizona, we do have a bipartisan commission that's charged with drawing those boundaries. And I think, by and large, they've tried to do a pretty good job. I didn't see any weird line drawing of the kind we've seen occasionally.
It seemed like the best solution.
Yeah.
But broadly, we see in this country such polarization in every aspect of politics. And I'm often struck by the fact that when you were on the court, you were able to express a sort of moderate sensibility of the majority of the country better than these polarized legislatures. And I do not see that on the court today, which is very distressing.
I think we do have issues in the country today of polarization. I think we need to learn to get to know each other and work better together. Let me mention, for instance, how Congress operates. Members of Congress arrive in Washington on Tuesday morning, even if they live as far away as Alaska. They get there Tuesday morning, and they're available in Washington in their offices Tuesday afternoon, all day Wednesday, Thursday morning, and they all leave Thursday afternoon. Now, believe me, that does not leave time to get to know each other, not even the members of your own party, much less the members of the other party. And I know how this works, because when I was in the state Senate in Arizona, I had a majority of 1 for my party. That meant that I had to find supporters on the other side of the aisle for most pieces of legislation, or you weren't going to get it passed. And I had to get to know and make friends with people on both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats. And we used to have potluck dinners at my house, and I'd fix some chalupas, and we'd get some beer, and we'd invite all the legislators, all of them, both parties. And we would have a nice time. It would be a good chance to get acquainted and make friends. And believe me, I could get enough votes on most of the legislation that we had to pass. Once in a while, there'd be one that was so partisan, you couldn't. But by and large, because we knew each other, we could get these things passed. And that doesn't happen in Congress today. And I think if I were in Congress today, one of the things that I would propose is to require that members of Congress are there 3 weeks out of the month, then let them stay home a week and do their campaigning. But the rest of the time, Monday through Saturday, make them be there. I think maybe they'd get acquainted again, and that wouldn't be all bad.
And should President Obama invite the House Majority Leader over for homemade chalupas?
Well, I don't know if that's going to help. You need the whole bunch. Maybe you'd have to ask everybody. But that wouldn't be a bad idea either.
There was more of that, and this is not a frivolous concern you're raising. In the old days, the president would invite the whole Supreme Court over after the Steele seizure decision. Harry Truman was really angry with the court, and he invited them all over to his, Hugo Black invited Truman over to his house, and they sat around, and Truman was sulking, and finally he said, Hugo, I don't think much of your law, but by golly, this bourbon's pretty good.
Yes, that's right.
Should we go back to chalupas and bourbon? I mean, do you think that there should be more of this face-to-face contact between
I think that in every legislative branch, there should be mechanisms to enable the members to get to know each other on a personal level and to make some friends. And in the case of Congress, I think it would mean requiring them to stay there part of every month. But anyway, now are we going to let people ask questions if they want to?
I think that's a judicial order, so I'll take my cue from that.
I thought that was part of the deal.
Your timing is better than mine, and this is exactly the right moment to ask for questions. So ladies and gentlemen, you have
But we
this
need
great
lights
opportunity.
on so I can see the people out there. Somebody just turned all the lights off, so I couldn't see. But let's let people ask questions. Yes?
Good idea.
Your Honor, I know and appreciate and respect that you're reluctant to talk about the court. But I'm sort of going back to the West Virginia case that you cited, and I wonder whether the concerns that you had about that might also apply to the concerns that we're seeing more and more of, where several members of the court seem to be frustratingly close to financial sources that support litigants.
Well, I don't know about that. I don't know what you're referring to.
Well, what I'm referring to is the stories in the press about Justice Thomas and Justice Scalia, who have who have received what appear to be benefits in the form of invitations and in the form of support for large programs that they're associated or interested in.
Oh, I think you're probably talking about some critical articles because one or more of them went to one or more events sponsored by a particular interest group. To raise
Or raise money for the group. The gentleman was saying that the claim is that the justices might have helped to participate in the fundraising of
Well,
these
I
schools.
don't think it's allowed for federal judges to participate in raising money. So if that's the allegation, it could be pursued. That's not allowed. So if there are complaints, they could certainly be made. Yes.
First of all, thank you very much for first your service on the court and for what you're doing now. And would you tell us about the project that you have with schools and civic education?
Oh, I sure
And also
will.
tell us, please, how we can get that into our own communities.
Well, thank you for asking me. Now, she's not prompted, but I wish I had. When I retired from the court, it was because my husband had Alzheimer's and he had reached the stage where I simply couldn't take care of him at home. He needed some nursing care, and I thought it was better that he go to a place in Arizona where 2 of our 3 children live and grandchildren were there, and we could arrange visits, and that was better. So I stepped down. And I think that worked out pretty well. But you wanted to know about this teaching. So I participated in setting up a conference at Georgetown Law School, and I got the help of Justice Breyer and a couple of the other justices, and we tried to invite some thoughtful people from all across the United States to come to that conference. And we talked about all the criticism being made of judges. I mean, it was pretty bad. Congress was proposing various bills to impeach any judge who ever cited a foreign judgment in the judge's opinion. I mean, there were all kinds of bills being proposed in Congress. And at the state level, too, do you remember South Dakota? They had a ballot proposition for voters in South Dakota called Jail for Judges. And if you went to court in South Dakota and lost your case, you could turn around and sue the judge and try to send him to jail because you lost your case. Now, how do you like that? So I felt we really needed to talk about, what was driving all this unhappiness with judges. And we had a very good conference. It was really marvelous. And we broke up into small discussion groups and so forth. And the consensus of the group was lack of education and understanding of the role of courts. And that we don't appreciate, we're not understanding, we're not well enough educated today about how courts work. And I quite agree. So I helped start a website, and it's called icivics.org, little I, civics.org. And we aimed it at young people, middle school to early high school. And we got some MacArthur Genius Award winners to help us design some games that the young people could play on a computer. They could just go dial up this thing and play games that would teach them how government worked. And we started out with the judicial branch to teach them how courts worked and develop some games to do that. But we decided, gosh, we've got these other 2 branches. Maybe we better not ignore them. So we have expanded, and we now cover all 3 branches of government. And the games are fabulous. I hope some of you will dial up icivics.org and see what we have. And young people get on, and they love them. And they'll play the games, and they'll play with others, and they learn without knowing they're learning. They're just having a good time. But in fact, they're learning. So we're trying to get them used in schools all across the country. And I have chair people in all 50 states. And if any of you want to help me, let me know. I'll tell you how you can. We have a question over here.
So, Justice, because you are the only female that has a law school named after her,
Yes.
do you feel that women will take a different stance than men on the judicial system? And if that would be the case, would there be more compassion for things that pertain to women, children, and families?
I don't know. That's hard to say. I don't think we have found an area where we can say, oh, yes, they're women, so we're going to do X. It doesn't usually work that way on the major issues. We find that both sexes end up being able to discuss issues for rational reasons and not just gender-based reasons. So I'm not sure that it makes any difference. And I was honored to have the law school named for me. It seems so strange to me to go to Tempe, Arizona and see Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law, but there it is, and it's doing well, and it has both women and men students, and they both seem to like to go there. So I guess it's working out all right. We have another question over here.
Justice O'Connor, also thank you for doing this. You've provided leadership all your life. In fact, it could be argued you've provided breakthrough leadership. Could you share with us what you've learned about leadership and perhaps answer or offer a view as to whether or not leaders can be made or do they have to be born?
I would think that there is a tiny element in us of our basic makeup as an individual, whether we like to work with groups, whether we like to try to persuade people to do things or not. Some people don't like that role and don't want to work in groups. So perhaps some of what we are is we're born with in terms of qualities that can be helpful to a leader. They're not perhaps essential, but an interest in working with other people and communicating with them and trying to get a consensus is a help for somebody who wants to be a leader. But we can certainly teach anyone who has an interest how to do it better. We certainly can do that, and I hope we can and will. So thanks for asking. All right, are we all set? We have another questioner over here.
Just as a question to the polarization issue in the federal level, not the state level, has polarization politicized the judicial appointment system to the place where it's become ineffective in executing?
Well, I don't think that it has. At the federal level, as I've already told you, all the federal judges are selected by the president, appointed by him, with the advice and consent of the Senate. Now, does a president care about the political party of the person being appointed? Well, they do care. George Washington cared. And so does Obama. And so did Ronald Reagan. So, you know, I think that's a part of the system. But even a member of one political party as president will occasionally appoint someone of the other party. We haven't seen that lately, but it's happened in the past, so it can. And we certainly know that it happens even today at the lower court level. It's more apt to than at the Supreme Court level, where it gets so much media attention. And at the district court and court of appeals levels, I think you will find some appointment of members of a political party, not the president's party, in almost every administration to some extent. So I don't think that's been a major problem for us. But at the top level, I think politics, the political registration of a nominee, is probably of interest to most of the presidents who make those appointments. But we've survived. It's been okay through the years, I think. We've had a pretty good record at the Supreme Court, I think. Yes.
Your Honor, it's been a pleasure to listen to you discuss some of the legal aspects, but it's also very delightful to hear these little nuggets about you, chalupas, beer, video gaming, et cetera. And I'm wondering, now that you're retired and you've had a chance to really kind of take a deep breath and see the world around you from Arizona, if not from Washington, can you give me an indication of leaders that are appealing to you and also trends in our society that really catch your attention?
Well, I don't know about leaders because I don't watch what happens in other states all that closely to be able
Characteristics of leadership that are really catching your attention right now.
What is it?
Characteristics of leadership that are...
Characteristics. Well, I like to support, when I have a chance to do so, people in leadership positions who have a pretty good broad education and who are able to see both sides of issues that they're going to have to decide. Someone who has the comprehension and ability to consider the arguments on both sides of the issues they'll have to decide. And we hope that we can select the person who will make a wise decision at the end of the day, having heard both sides of the arguments. That's what we look for in leaders, and I hope we can continue to find them. I don't know when you vote what you look for, but that's one of the things I look for.
And then the follow-up question for you is in terms of societal changes. I mean, mentioning video gaming as an educational tool, is there anything else that you're saying that really catches your attention and you're impressed with?
Oh, well, yes. I mean, I just selected that because I think that one of the things, when we started our country, public school education was not one of the things the framers wrote into the Constitution. It wasn't part of the design. And it wasn't until the 1800s, maybe 1830s about, that people began to realize, good heavens, we've got to do something. We should have public schools in this country to teach young people how our government works. If we don't do that, we're not going to be able to maintain this government that was formed for us. And that was absolutely right. That was a sound idea to get public schools to try to educate every one of our young citizens about how our system works. And that's why we started them. And it's critically important that we maintain good schools that can do that. And it's hard to do these days. I read with dismay the poor performance of American students today compared with those of other nations. There's a brand new survey out, and we participated with maybe 30 other nations. We're down close to the bottom on almost every area of study with our students. It's heartbreaking. We're not doing well in any area. And we've been concentrating, on math and science, but so far it hasn't turned things around. And I don't know how we're going to. The one common thread that people say they see in looking at the various nations, the ones that have the highest performance results for students, and ours, is the quality of the teachers they're using. And when you get really top-notch teachers, apparently you're getting a better result. And maybe we better really make a huge effort in this country to get the very best teachers we can. I don't know, I'd love to have others with a critical eye look at these new reports and see what you think. But we've got to do something in this country. We're not doing what we should. And none of our 50 states did very well as compared to other countries and other contestants in this test. And the one state that did the best, but it wasn't night and day, was Massachusetts. Certainly it wasn't Arizona. That's for sure. Okay, well now time for maybe one more question, then we're going to open it up for this next event that's taking place.
Your Honor, thank you for being here. Question, about the individual mandate within the healthcare law. It's obviously, there's a lot of cases going around the United States challenging the president's healthcare law, specifically the individual mandate. For all intents and purposes, it looks like this is going to end up in the Supreme Court. How do you think the court will view the individual
I haven't
mandate?
any idea. I don't know what's the details of that law, and I wouldn't hazard a guess.
Thank you for
Okay.
trying. That was a good try.
All right. Okay. I think.
Well,
you better-
I'll ask one last question that
Okay.
maybe you can answer. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, you've seen in this conversation how much the country has lost when Justice O'Connor resigned from the Supreme
No.
Court.
No. Mm-mm. No.
And in that spirit, I want
You just lost a cowgirl. That's what you lost.
That's not true. But as we've been discussing, some of your greatest opinions have been overturned or are under constitutional pressure in campaign finance and affirmative action and religion. What is your favorite opinion, the one that meant the most to you, and are you concerned that it might be overturned?
No, I'm not going to answer that.
I thought that was a relative softball.
Nah,
Well,
no.
ask the first part. What's your favorite opinion? You can answer that.
No.
Sure, you must have some. You wrote so many good ones.
I tried to do the best job I could with each one that came to me, and it's pretty hard to do. It's hard.
Ladies and gentlemen, as you've seen, Justice O'Connor asks questions, but she will not answer them when she doesn't want to. Please join me in thanking this
Okay.
remarkable
All right. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.